the need to move, to get off the site of the attack, which we refer to as the X. So in order to survive, you've got to move. But if you take that as a metaphor for life, getting off the X is about getting unstuck, being willing to move out of your comfort zone in order to do things that are meaningful and have purpose and are worth doing.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Casazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with a SEAL. Today's guest spent over a decade as a CIA intelligence officer conducting counterterrorism operations in the most volatile regions of the Middle East, often as the only woman in the room, navigating danger, diplomacy, and deep cultural divides. She has not only survived high-stake missions, but helped lead one of the most remarkable humanitarian rescues of our time, airlifting 149 persecuted Iraq Christians to safety. But her story isn't just about geopolitics. It's about fear, faith, resilience, and discovering your purpose when you feel most unqualified. She is the author of Breaking Cover and Getting Off the X, a keynote speaker, trainer, and a walking masterclass in situational awareness, leadership, and grit. Ladies and gentlemen, without further introduction, I am so excited to introduce you to Michele Rigby Assad. Michele, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Gina, and thanks for that lovely introduction.
Oh my God, it's a pleasure. When I was looking into you, I was like, oh my God, I am so excited to talk to you. And I have so much to talk about, especially from a women's perspective. You know, almost everybody except for Sarah has been a male on the show. And I'd love to get your perspective, especially because as you mentioned, as we mentioned in the bio, you know, you were often the only woman in the room. But before I go there in that aspect, I want to start with the getting off the X, only because it's such a trigger in terms of, we had this conversation with Jason Redman. He talks about this. He talks about it in his book. He talks about it in his keynotes with getting off the X. And you have a whole entire book about it. So, and it's such a powerful metaphor from when Jason explained it. And now whenever I see it, I'm always, circling back to that. Can you walk us through a moment where you were frozen on the X and how you mentally got off and what it means to get off the X for you?
As many of your listeners will know, Get Off the X is a counter ambush strategy. So the idea is to fight the freeze response when you're under attack or you're in the middle of criminals, cartels, or terrorists who are trying to kill you. What it refers to is the need to move, to get off the site of the attack, which we refer to as the X. And so in order to survive, you've got to move. But if you take that as a metaphor for life, you realize that getting off the X is about getting unstuck, being willing to move out of your comfort zone in order to do things that are meaningful and have purpose and are worth doing. So, and when you think about it, we get stuck a lot in life. I mean, goodness, I got stuck so many times in the field in dangerous positions, and it worked for me. The training worked, thank God. And you asked me to give you a situation, my first tour in a very dangerous country, which at the time wasn't considered a war zone, but is now. It was one of the hijacking and kidnapping capitals of the world. I was basically stopped at a light by myself in the car, and an individual was crossing the road in front of me. He saw that my face was uncovered, and so he blocked my path in my car by carrying out a very embarrassing sexual activity in the middle of the road because he was so shocked to see an uncovered face, and I guess that was too much for him. And then what ended up happening was there were cars behind me, cars beside me. I was against the curb, and I realized the situation was devolving as men came from out of the woodwork wanting to know what's going on and what's causing this big ruckus. And having been in that country for at least a year at that point, I knew that because so many people were unemployed and spent half the day high, any time there was a car accident, they would hundreds of people would surround the car, and you couldn't get anywhere. And then you were effectively a sitting target. At that time, targets of opportunity were taken by tribesmen and sold to Al-Qaeda and killed. And so we had always told ourselves, you can never get taken because it never ends well, ever. I realized that I was suddenly on this X that what started out as like a sexual, I don't know if you want to call it harassment, like it's embarrassing sexual situation in front of my car that's blocking me. But now that people are gathering my car, I realize, oh no, I'm on the X. And thankfully the training kicked in. I put my foot in the gas and I had to hit him twice in order to get him to move. I mean, I was shocked. He was shocked. I couldn't believe that after the first time, he literally got back up again and then continued the act. And at which I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And I didn't want to run him over, but I thought, like, if it's between me and you, like, I'm not, in a few more seconds, I'm going to be surrounded and I will not be able to move as a single American unarmed woman in this country that's swimming in weapons. So anyway, I had to hit him the second time. He finally realized I was serious. He finally moved out of the way and I like gunned it. The training worked, but I realized too that I also have applied this concept to life in general and realized I am extremely proficient in getting off the X, getting unstuck and moving through fear and uncertainty and anxiety. And I'm trying to help other people do the same thing.
You talked about the training. That's a crazy story, by the way. You talked about the training. The training worked. What was the training in order to get that to work?
Yeah. The training they give us in the agency was probably a little bit different than they do with law enforcement or military. But for us, they tried to mimic a terror attack. And so they would put us in vehicles. We were all piled into a vehicle, like maybe 5 or 6 of us. And then they would attack the vehicle and they'd kill the engine. So they had an engine kill switch. And so what happened was you would end up having to get out of the car and run from the terrorists who were shooting at you with simunitions. So this is how they mimicked an actual attack. And of course they came out of the woods with like Al-Qaeda things wrapped around their heads and yelling, Allahu Akbar, and using flashbang grenades to make it as realistic as possible. And so what's great about that is it trains your brain how to react under stress, so that God forbid it ever actually happens in real life. Your brain goes, oh, I've been there and I know what to do. And you can fight the freeze response and get off the X and move and hopefully survive.
So let's talk about that real quick. How many times did you, I'm assuming it's not just one and done, right? It's like we did this a couple of times, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it was one and done, but I would just assume. And how was the first time compared to, I mean, it's quite shocking. I would make the assumption. Right?
Yes, it is. Yes. I hated this training. I mean, and the guys loved it because again, I'm not special forces. I'm not military. I just signed up to be wee little intelligence officer. So this was outside my scope and I didn't think it was fun at all. So yeah, I hated it. And we had to do it in various types of scenarios. That was the most kind of like extreme. But each time you did it, like you felt more prepared and your brain was like, yep, I know what to do. And clearly it worked because in the field, my brain very quickly understood that I was on the X without me really even going, okay, what do I do now? It trained me appropriately that I just did what I needed to do because in the field, probably if you talk to a lot of special forces, they'll tell you, you have a small window of time to act appropriately. And if you don't get in that window of time, then things devolve so quickly and so badly. Yeah. Thank God thank God it didn't.
Wow. Yeah. That's wow. So then you talked about, well, I mean, you just said like, I'm dominated by male. The males loved it,
Yeah.
What was it like for you as a woman then being in especially in things like this, like where it was so male dominated?
So to be fair, like in my training class, maybe half the class was female. So in that regard, okay. I was very balanced. However, at that point in time, we had a very, I would say, a sexist approach to operations where men were placed primarily in one position, which is the case officer position. And women were mostly put into the position right behind them called collection management officer, which is what I was. We all got trained the same way, exact same training, but they believed that men were better in the role of a case officer, which turned out to not be correct. Whoever is best is whoever knows the most about that area, right? Like, so it's really your skill set and your knowledge of that culture that really matters. So unfortunately, we were not judged in that way. We were judged on our gender and not on like my first bosses never asked me what I was good at. What did I study in school? Did I know Arabic? How much had I been in the Middle East? Never asked a question. Weren't even interested in knowing the skill set. So I was a female in very male environments in the sense of I'm living in the Middle East and almost all of our friends were men because very few women went to these places. And I mean, even they didn't bring their wives. So I was with my husband and we were always surrounded by men. And of course, in operations, when I finally busted into carrying out operations, finally, I was always dealing with terrorists and insurgents because we were doing counterterrorism work and that's who you deal with. Those are who your sources are. And so that was a very interesting dynamic as a female dealing with these people who think you're an idiot and you couldn't possibly know anything about the messy politics of the Middle East or terrorism. So that was it was a very challenging but super fascinating dynamic to get them like to push through that barrier.
So let's talk about some internal dialogue that you must have been having throughout all of this, right? It's like, well, you're being underestimated, you're, being dismissed, right?
Yes, a lot.
Yes. So what is the internal dialogue that you either were developing or having to fight off because of the environment that you were then from the environment that you're in?
So a lot of the internal dialogue was like, oh my God, maybe they're right. They're the CIA. They must know who's best suited to do this work. Because like, what do I know? I'm from a small town in Florida. Like, what the heck? And so it was like buying into it like, okay, well, they're really, really smart because they're the CIA. And then, over time realizing, oh, wait a minute, maybe people aren't as, I don't know. I don't want this to sound wrong. Maybe they're not as smart as I thought all of these people were. And, a lot of people in the CIA were not Arabists. We're not Arab culture specialists. And so they didn't know.
And that was your specialty.
Yes. Oh, I worked so hard to learn the Middle East before I got into the CIA. And that's why I was able to bust through because I understood so well. As a white woman from rural America, I was able to study so hard and travel so much in the Middle East that I had the knowledge that I needed to like challenge these guys. That was so fun too. Like the best breakthrough. So the internal dialogue was interesting because I'm also a very highly motivated person and I want to win. So I'm being told you can't win, but I still want to win. And it was like, I can't do this. But I have to do this. I have to figure it out. But no, you can't do it. But yes, I'm going to figure it out. Like, I don't know. We women are very emotional creatures. And so there's a lot that goes on in our minds that is contradictory at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, we are emotional. We do have, I feel, I can only speak for my gender and I can only speak for me. But my internal dialogue, I am constantly fighting. Like when I was in the Navy SEAL prep program, I was one of the only females. And at the first day, I was the only female. And I always just had to fight this negative dialogue that I put on myself because these guys didn't put it on me. Like, and I will say that was the difference. Like in the environment that I was in with these guys, it's like, I thought everyone was laughing at me, thought everybody was making fun of me because I was just terrible. I wasn't like you in terms of like, coming in like with knowledge and all this stuff. Like, no, I had none of that. And yet no one made fun of me. Everyone helped me. They cheered me on. Like it was a totally different like experience that these guys were absolutely incredible.
Amazing.
And the internal dialogue I had was, you're not good enough. They're all laughing at you. But nobody was actually doing it to me. But for you, they were actually doing it to you. And that's a totally different internal dialogue. That's not you projecting, it's the environment projecting onto you, right?
Yeah.
And, and that causes some self-doubt. I mean, that causes a lot of self-doubt.
Loads of it.
You talked about it, right?
Loads.
You talked about that and stuff. So how do you battle that? What were some of the things that maybe you did? Like for myself, I had mantras for myself. So anything that negative came in, I had these mantras that I would say to myself week after week was a new one, right? For you, was there anything that you did to get out of your self-doubt, and what do you have for others that might be stuck in that self-doubt?
What I'm going to say is not popular. People
Okay.
don't like to hear it. I just decided, Gina, I said, I'm being totally underestimated. Nobody thinks I'm capable of anything here except my husband, and thank God for him. I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to do this job, and I'm going to do it so well. And it's going to take some time for people to realize, but I'm going to be so excellent at my job that you're not going to be able to ignore me any longer. And that's not a hack, because it takes time. And of course I had to learn my job too. Like, you get, you get taken out of training and throw it in the field and you still barely know what you're doing, right? So I had to learn my job, and then I just committed myself to excellence. And so when the doors finally opened for me to start doing operations, the results were so amazing that then people got on board with like, oh, you're actually really good at this. And of course it was a surprise to me too, because I really didn't know. I mean, I don't know if I was going to be good with terrorists. Like, who knows that? Like, I'm really good at dealing with bad guys, but who knew?
It's interesting that I like what you're saying. Like, I just was going to prove myself through the work, right? And that sometimes can get frustrating because it's a long game you're playing, right?
Yep.
And especially in today's world where everything is so instant, we're now trained for everything to be instant, right? And so how do you I'm sure there was moments when you were frustrated. I'm sure there's
All the
moments when
time.
you're like, I'm not sure if my time's going to come.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
how do you push through and just keep on going?
I think that I'm a really stubborn person. You're laughing. You're like, ah. I may not be the smartest person in the room, but I know I'm one of the most committed, and I will persevere to the end. And I learned that as a really small, like as a toddler even. So my parents were in Amway when I was a little kid. And Amway was, for all its maybe issues, the great thing about Amway is it taught people how to be positive thinkers and how to control that inner dialogue that's really negative. So as a little kid, a few years old, I heard these cassette tapes playing where it was about, you need to choose to be a winner. And what being a winner is you keep getting up every time you fall or you make a mistake, and you get up again. And it's not necessarily about being number one. It's doing the best job you possibly can. And I remember being like 4-year-olds, and I'm like, I'm going to be a winner. Like, I am choosing to be a winner. Like, what do you know it for? But it was so ingrained in me that I just had a huge reserve of perseverance that I drew on through my whole life, that said, no matter how hard this is, no matter how uncertain I feel, I will not give up.
I love that. And as you're saying that, I'm going to see my nephew in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to be taking care of him for a couple of weeks. And I am going to be doing some stuff like that. Like I'm bringing in I always bring some stuff to teach, like in terms of, positive affirmation stuff. We do a lot of lessons through songs through my children's book, and we were going to do like speech, because he's learning how to speak. But now I'm like, oh God, I got to do that too. I love that. You're wiring the brain for success. You're wiring your brain for resilience, already at a young age. And I think that is paramount. And, pivoting to your book, because, you mentioned thinking you're too ordinary, but listening to you talk, I mean, it's only been a couple of minutes, but man, you sound like an extraordinary human being. And I want to know what you would say to listeners who feel that same way, who feels like, they might be too ordinary to do extraordinary things.
That's such a good question. You know what I would say? What makes you extraordinary is your perseverance, that resilience, that grit, that unwillingness to give up, because you can always find people that are smarter and better and more capable than you. And you can look at them and you can see it very clearly, as I did growing up. But it's funny, like I remember kids that I went to school with and I thought, man, they are going to be so successful in life because they were natural at A, B, and C. But it turns out for whatever reason, they didn't really have much grit. And so they didn't become all they could have been as an adult. And so I'm really convinced that we have to stop measuring ourselves by like how quickly we rise and whether you get the highest test scores or not and your SATs and all that. Because at the end of the day, it's the resilience, perseverance, grit thing that matters the most. Those are the people who come out on top. You hear it over and over again. They're like, I would just stubbornly wouldn't give up. I'm like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, just keep on going. I hear you. I understand that one. And it takes a lot of perseverance to I really want to talk about the humanitarian rescue you did, the 149 lives. And that takes a lot of perseverance, I'm sure. And leading that mission. Can you talk about that mission first, and then I'll go into my questions around that?
Mm-hmm. In 2015, which if people remember, it was like the summer of the Great Migration into Europe from the sea, from land, from every direction. People from Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Middle East were all flooding into Europe. And then ISIS fled back from Syria into Iraq and took over northern Iraq, swept across the whole country through Mosul and literally took over in like overnight, like a day or two, and they had control over these cities, which is crazy. But during that period of time, these ancient communities of Christians and Yazidis were uprooted from their homeland. So like for the Christians, they've been there for over 2,000 years since Christ. And suddenly they're fleeing ISIS because their village has been surrounded and they've been told, convert or die or become a sexual slave. These are your choices. Not very good choices. So overnight, almost 1 million people fled. And so we were brought into this project by a group of people who were just very sensitive to the rights of Christians as minorities in the Middle East and said, can we do something to help them? And so they had a fundraiser. They had someone who was, big in media, but they just didn't have anyone to do the operational side of this, like the actual get on the ground and see if there's some way we could find a group of Iraqi Christians to help relocate to another country. I would like to claim credit for this, but I have to tell you, Gina, like whenever you have such a complex operation like this, 1,000 things goes wrong, as you know, as an operational person, especially when you're dealing with a group that we were dealing with hundreds of people. And while I'd love to take credit at the end of the day, I really have to say that it was such a God thing that any of it worked out, because everything that could go wrong went wrong. Murphy showed up, as Murphy always does in ops, and threw off this and threw off that in a miraculous period of time, only 3.5 months. We not only found a group to work with, but we approached multiple countries. We found only one country willing to take these people in Europe. And we put together the entire logistics of getting passports and visas and permissions and travel and setting up all of this giant airlift of these people. We successfully airlifted 149 Iraqi Christians out of Kurdistan and brought them to Slovakia on December 10th, 2015. And it was there's nothing about it that was normal. It was totally miraculous, every bit of it. And I talk about that in my book, Breaking Cover, because it reads like a Hollywood movie because it felt like a Hollywood movie. I swear. Yeah. Being in the middle of it, I was like, this is crazy. But if you want to be inspired about when you do something, when you're involved in a mission to help other human beings, when you've got a God in the mix, amazing things can happen that are much greater than you. And so that's what we saw there.
Oh my goodness. Just first of all, like that situation in itself, right? And everything then going wrong and all this stuff. What are some mindset tools that allow you to manage the risk, the emotion, the responsibility without breaking under pressure?
Yeah. So what you learn probably in special forces and what we learn in the CIA when we're in training is that you do your best to plan for all the things that could go wrong in an operation. And we're trained to know they will go wrong. So if in your head you've said, okay, the following 30 things could potentially happen. So we're going to set up contingency plans on how we will react. So this is part of the whole planning process of an operation. And then, of course, the stuff happens. And so what you find that your brain does when you've properly prepared, your brain doesn't freak out, doesn't freeze. That's the most important thing. You go into problem solving mode and you quickly and efficiently solve each problem as it comes your way, and you don't crumble. You watch some people who have never really put themselves out there, never gotten off the X, these people in your lives. And it's amazing to me how easily some people crumble, and you realize it's because they've never been through something difficult before. The more that you're put through stress and difficulty, the more you can bear it and the more you can move through it. And so at the end of the day, you're focusing. And I remember standing at the counter. So my job at the very last bit, when we're finally at the airport checking them in for this flight, I don't know if you know much about the Middle East, but in the Middle East, if someone sniffs that something is wrong or awry, they will stop it. And so we knew that if Iraqi authorities decided that something untoward was going on, that flight was not leaving, and those people were not getting on that flight. And so we're checking in, and the guy who's checking us in is asking 100 questions about these travelers. And I am standing helping all of them check in because most of them had never traveled before, had never been on an airplane, and had no idea what they were doing. So I'm facilitating this exchange. And the guy was asking me all these questions about who are these people and why are they traveling. It was all legal, so we had all the right visas and we weren't doing anything illegal, but I did have a cover story of why everyone was traveling. Because if I tell this person in front of me that these persecuted Christians are fleeing persecution, what might happen to the persecuted minorities? Well, we're going to shut that down and persecute you more. So I was just like, keep this guy happy. And so I kept I inside was sweating. And I was nervous in my heart. I was like, oh gosh, he's asking questions. But I just stood there like I was so confident. And I was just being delightful with this man. And I was doing my best to calm him down and not show the nerves inside. And at one point towards this like he asking me question, well, who are these people and where are they going and why are they going? And there's just a lot of them. They have a lot of luggage. And he's asking me all these questions. And I'm like, oh, it's fine. I made up all kinds of answers. And then he looks at me and he goes, these people are never coming back here, are they? And I go, of course they are. Yes. They're coming back. They're just going on a religious tour. And he's like, and I knew he knew, but he didn't shut it down. And so that's the value of planning ahead in your mind for all that could go wrong and not losing focus and not being overwhelmed by the stress.
What I got from that, it was amazing, but for our listeners, so many people that I know, don't want to make a plan because they're like, it's going to go wrong. Well, yeah, plans, that's what they do. They go wrong, right? Yes. But I, especially within my family, I'm always like, let's make the plan. Let's make the itinerary. And they go, well, it never goes according that way. I go, yeah, but the thing is that there's so much chaos that happens. Learn how to make a plan and adjust accordingly. And I think that people don't do that. They don't I am such a big planner. And I know that not everything's going to go according to plan, but I can adjust and I can move on. But that's how you train yourself to stay calm and not react. And I live in a reaction family. We're Italian. Everything is just a bigger deal than it is, right? And the thing is after listening to you, I'm saying to myself, maybe it's because they don't make plans. They just don't, they just rather just wing it and it's chaos either way. It's like, why not just make the plan and teach yourself how to be calm or adjust? I think that was a great lesson. I really like that. I'm going to share this exact clip with my family because they don't listen to my stuff.
I love the summarization you just provided because you're so right. Here's the other expectation in life. If something goes wrong, it must be that you're going down the wrong path, so just quit. And you and I both know, that is not how it works. If you're saying if something goes wrong or there's an obstacle in your path, which my book is about, Get Off the X, Conquering Obstacles, your path is going to be littered with obstacles. It's what you do with them.
Oh, it's so funny. I was like one of the sayings that like really irks me is it is what it is. And they just stop there. They're just like, well, it is what it is. And I'm like, until it isn't. I'm like, continue the line. And I go, and you're the it isn't. You gotta move. Like
Yeah.
you gotta take control of it. We don't just go, it is what it. I think the thing is we've gotten accustomed to just like quitting and being lazy and just not wanting to continue, right?
Quitting.
So then we just talk it and like to ourselves because I just think people naturally want to win. I think like we don't like being losers, right? But the thing is like we do like excuses to then like you know, you go into Navy SEAL training, right? You hear it all the time with the people on the show and like someone gets injured and that's their cop out. It's like, well, I could have made it, but then I got injured, right? And they don't want to continue, right? So I feel like when people are like, well, it is what it is, it's just because they don't want to, you know, that's their cop out. That's their, I'm just going to say where I am and move, where it's like, until it isn't, like drive the ship, let's go, move, get off the X, you know?
Yeah.
I love that. That was great. So that was great. And, you know, and all this stuff that you talk about, it's courage. You know, you have a lot of courage within you, right? And I just think we, as human beings, we naturally have a lot of courage because, you know, our brain's job is to keep us safe. So it's going to give it that courage that we feel like we don't have. And, you know, what do you feel like the misconception about courage is and how do you actually build that?
Courage is definitely a muscle. And the more you choose to do things that are uncomfortable or you're not sure whether you can do them or not, the more that you get through and you conquer, you're like, you have more courage to try something else. So walking into the CIA for the first day, I can still remember thinking to myself, what am I doing? Who am I to be walking into the halls of the CIA? And I don't know if I can do this. And I'm about to start an entire year of tradecraft training that's about to teach me how to break the rules of a foreign country, to collect intelligence, to break these laws, and for my country so they can make good decisions. Like, what? And you don't know if you can do any of those things. But I kept saying to myself, you just have to have the courage to try. If this door has opened to you, and of course, you know, even getting in that door is a major miracle. To even just get through the entire process of being vetted by special ops or the CIA is a big deal. So finally, you make it through this like huge vetting process and the door is still open to you. You think, well, you know what? I better run through that door, whether I feel like I'm capable or not, because they think I'm capable and God thinks I'm capable, so I might as well try. The more you conquer the next challenge, the more you're like, oh my God, I didn't know I could do that. Well, what's the next thing I didn't know I could do?
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee. You know, I talk so much about resilience on the show, but I haven't talked about spiritual resilience. And you know, in the way that you've been speaking and stuff, I feel like you'd be perfect to talk and ask these questions because on spiritual resilience, because, you know, in your environment and the challenges, you know, you mentioned you couldn't have, with everything going wrong with those people that you rescued and all that stuff, how does your faith hold up and how does it evolve through your most dangerous mission?
Your faith, just like your courage muscle, if your faith is like a muscle too that you build over time when you see how, you know, God works and how he moves and all of that stuff. And I would say maybe the best gift I could give your listeners is to say something like this. If you have to rely on yourself, It's a very empty well. I don't know about you, but I don't want to rely on myself because I don't know enough to rely. Like I really don't. And there's nothing in my life that I felt that I had enough knowledge or intelligence to do. But here's what I want listeners to hear. If you believe in a God, or if you believe in this larger creative force, then you can believe that they know better than you what you're capable of. So for me, that gave me the courage. I thought, I don't trust in myself, but I can trust in God, because if he opened this door, then he thinks I'm capable of walking through it. And also he doesn't want me to be mediocre. Like he's not like, I got you in the CIA, but you're going to just be average. Like, I don't want that. He got me into the CIA and he helped me build this courage muscle and do all these things I didn't know I could do, and at the end of the day, he wants you to be excellent in whatever you do. So the good thing is, you don't have to be anxious and worrying about how you're going to accomplish anything, because you can rely on this greater force to get you through it. So for me, it's like, well, thank God, because I don't trust myself. I don't know anything.
How do you use that, right? While also like trusting your gut. Like if that because to me, like it's very similar. It's
Yeah,
like
it is
to me,
very
it's like one
similar.
thing, right? To me, it's like one thing. So for you, like how do you, because someone was telling me on the show like a while back, and I didn't really think about it too. He's like, you have to learn how to, he goes, trusting your gut though is a skill, because you have to start to know yourself and know that feeling and know what's going on, and question things and stuff like that. And for you, like CIA, you're reading people, you have to read the environment. I mean, what you talked about being in the car and just knowing, run this guy over. I got to run this guy over. Like, I just got to go for it. Right.
Yeah.
Like what principles can we apply
Yeah.
to like our listeners, to better read a room, to trust our gut, what can we do to then, or to get off that X, in training ourselves for the patterns, the signals, the things that we might not always be attuned to, because I feel like these days we're walking around in the white, all the
Yeah,
time.
totally.
Instead of, we're not in yellow, red, or, then
Yeah.
suddenly wearing black.
Yeah.
Right. So what can we
So
do
let
for that?
me deconstruct this thing we called intuition, because it's a very, I'm fascinated by this. I'm so glad you brought it
Yeah.
up. We could call it 1,000 different names, like intuition, gut, a hunch, a feeling, the hairs standing on the back of your neck. It's like a sixth sense. It's like this woo-woo magical weird thing. But what it really is pattern recognition, but it's subconscious pattern recognition. So what is happening when you have a gut feeling about something is that your brain has a catalog of experiences that it's drawing from as you walk through life. And so often we'll come to some conclusion, or we'll have some feeling about something that we arrive at so quickly before we're conscious of how we got there. So in other words, your brain will register danger or a red flag in someone's behavior quicker than we know why, quicker than we realize that our brain knows, but it's a subconscious thing because it's pattern recognition. And so when you realize that, the more experiences you have in these areas, the more patterns you have to draw from. And so as a trained CIA officer, I'll just give you a really hilarious example of this. Oh my gosh, this is so funny. Because in the first tour, every time the gates of our compound of our one house opened, we had guards on the inside, we had guards on the outside. It was such a dangerous place. But every time those gates opened and our car drove off that compound, we were actively looking for hostile surveillance, actively looking for what we call corresponding movements. It means someone sees you moving and then they start moving and they follow you. Because in our world, that could lead to a kidnapping or a terrorist attack or whatever, especially if they find out the American lives on that compound. So you are your most vulnerable when you're leaving your home or when you're leaving your work, because these are the places you are every day. What happens yesterday? We're leaving to go to Easter service at church early in the morning. The gates of our house, we're living in a beautiful part of the United States in Florida. They're like, this is not like a war zone, not even remotely. But we noticed a car fly by and then park very quickly, like pull in like a bat out of hell and pulled into the side of the road there. And both of us immediately, my husband and I were like, whoop, what is that? Subconscious pattern recognition is that this driving behavior is not quite right. Do you know what we just figured out? It's a surveillance operation. We basically, that car was there all day long. That person never got out of the car, and someone in my neighborhood is being surveilled.
Ah.
I won't say any more about that, but we figured out that's definitely what's happening. And
Wow.
now, and mine, I got the red flags coming out all over here.
Yeah. 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 I wouldn't even, yeah, that's because that's your wheelhouse. I mean, and that's
My peaceful street.
wow.
When you're tuned in and when you have enough of those life experiences, you see things other people don't see. So another example I give in one of my books was walking through a toy store with I don't know if my niece was like 6, 7, 8 years old, and we were in the Barbie aisle, and you know what the Barbie aisle looks like? It's like hot pink everywhere. It's all the hot pink, and we're walking down, and I see this dude crouched down by the Barbie dolls. And I immediately go, whoop, and I'm like, why did this man just make me everything just like go like crazy, like red flags everywhere? And I started, as I'm walking, I'm deconstructing. He's crouched on by the Barbie dolls. I don't see kids anywhere. I'm like scanning. Where are the children? Where are the kids? Does he have kids? He's just there by himself. He has greasy hair. He's unkempt. Half of his shirt's tucked in. The other half is not tucked in. I decide to pay attention. So this is what your listeners need to hear. You either ignore it and say, oh my God, you just jump to conclusions about some poor dude crouched down by. Men can like Barbies too. Like we can talk ourselves out of the intuition so quickly. Mm-hmm. Do not do that. Your brain is so good at identifying patterns. I didn't ignore it, and I watched him as we walked down the aisle, and as we walked past him, I watched him turn, and I watched his eyes go to my niece, and I saw what those eyes looked like, and I knew he was a pedophile. The way he looked at her, I won't even define that for the audience. It was disgusting. And of course, I just tried to like cover her and then like ushered her down the aisle and out. Like, I was like, he is so a pedophile, like so clearly a pedophile. So don't ignore these red flags. Don't talk yourself out of it. Pay attention because those details matter.
I mean, you put it, it's funny. I said to someone the other day, I was like, I love when people are like, I don't judge, it's like, it's like, no, we're all judging. Like, like we're all like I'm seeing that it's kind
behavior.
of important too. It's like it's very, very important to be able to look. And it's a judgment but the thing is that judgment is what could save your life.
Yes,
it's like,
correct.
and I think that we are so black and white these days, and it can really harm you when it's like, well, like you said, you're talking yourself off of it because we're trying to be all kind and whatever you want to say about it. Mm-hmm. But in reality, those judgments, because we talk about like judging as such a negative thing, but the way you're talking, that's a very positive thing. In that moment, we had to make an assessment, make that judgment, and save a child. I mean, essentially, it's what it really comes down to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, don't dismiss it because people get hung up on, well, he was black, he was white, he was this. No, your brain is actually picking up on behavior and how someone appears in the sense of like, I could see he was unkempt, I could see he was half tucked in. Like these are these things I'm picking up. I'm like, right, not normal. And then why would that kind of guy be buying a Barbie doll? Like,
yeah. So you just mentioned behavior, right? And you talked about like, understanding that behavior. How does one develop that? Like, what training did you go through that really helped you in terms of picking up on certain behaviors that are warnings and dangers?
So much of our CIA training is meant to help you be aware of your surroundings and to look at details because it's a matter of life and death, quite honestly. And when you're carrying out operations, if you are not attending to every detail, you're going to miss a counterintelligence flag. Or if you don't identify surveillance leading you to your meeting, you could out your secret source and, then get them jailed, tortured, or killed. So we were trained in the CIA to pay attention to details. And as you mentioned, like, you can't always be on. It takes too much mental energy. So you can't walk through life. You can't walk through life like, oh, what's going to happen now? But you have to develop an awareness for when you're vulnerable or when you need to pay attention. So if, say, I'm sure you're the same way, if I am going to my parked vehicle in a garage parking lot, I'm always like, that's where I'm really paying attention, because that's where it's so easy to get assaulted or God knows what. I mean, there's certain places in life that you just know, a dark parking lot.
Right. Yeah.
You're responsible for a child. You're going to think differently of certain, being at the park with your kid. Like, so there, when to dial it in, when to pay attention, and then you trust that you've had enough life experience to know when someone's acting totally normal and when something's off. So there's establishing a baseline for what's normal, and then noticing when something goes off that baseline. It's a departure from normal.
Now, how was that for you when you talked about where you were living in the compound where you gate guards, and when you were off, when you left, I mean, you had to be on like that whole entire time, right?
Yeah.
First of all, as you mentioned, that's exhausting, right? And
Yeah.
you're not, and sometimes and also there's a fear that kicks in there. It's like, I have to be on right now. This could, this is life or death, right?
Yeah.
How do you handle that situation internally to control whatever and to control whatever going on, and also be aware, like, to not allow that fear to then to whatever the word I'm trying to look for the word in terms of, like, not allowing the fear to take over where you then miss something. That's the best I'm trying to figure out how to
so
say
you there's really not a lot of place for fear when you're looking for environmental details. Like, it's so your focus, you can't have fear and focus at the same time. It's one or the other. So you focus on doing the thing that you need to do, which is picking up on the details of your environment, the people, the cars, what's normal, what's not, which cars belong to your neighbors, which don't, things like that. Like, did that person get out of the car? No, they never got out of the car. They just parked the car and sat there all day. Like, that's a clue. Focus and fear cannot coexist. And then also, so preparing in CIA training, God, I just remember how nervous I used to be. Like, my heart's beating on my chest. I'm about to do a surveillance detection run, like a 3-hour run. And it's just like deep breathing exercise. That was so important to pushing the fear out and getting your heart rate controlled and your perspiration controlled. So when they say deep breathing exercises make a difference, it really does. Like, I had to do that all the time, especially in training when you're learning and you don't know what you can do. And you're so
yeah.
You,
in the very, very beginning of this interview, we talked about self-doubt, right?
Yeah.
And then what you just said just kind of triggered the word second guessing. Like, when when you're like leaving and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that car wasn't there before. But then you ever like second guess me, like, maybe it was, I don't know, and then like, or you, because for memory wise, and you have to know things and pick up on things. How often did you second guess yourself, and what do you do for something like that? Like, is it always
we
like
to document
yourself, like,
yeah.
Okay.
So
you write it down.
You always have to document that this looked unusual. I'm going to write down that car, make, model, and plate number. So I will have it documented. If I see it again, I will know, and the date, where I saw it, when I saw it, what time, and all of that. So in other words, documentation is your friend. That's how you figure things out over time. Yeah.
I guess sometimes I just always think, like,
or speaking it out loud.
That would make the most sense,
Yeah.
because that's how you're going to memorize. That's how you're going to know. It's not like you're always going to memorize it,
There's like a cheesy way to do this as well, which cracked me up. Like, there were one day in our 10-year tour, we were in a new country, and my husband was like, let's practice this. This is so cheesy. Like calling out cars as we see them on the road. It's called commentary driving. And I'm like, we're going to see 1,000 cars today. Like, this is so dumb, but if he wants to play this game, fine. So we start doing commentary driving, and we call out this car and that car. And it's like, I see this, I see that, but you're saying it out loud. So it's kind of cementing it in your memory. Gina, I kid you not, probably 5 hours later, one of the random cars we saw at the very beginning of our drive, we saw it again because it was a particular van with a particular company emblem on it that we called out. And that was the day that we realized we were under surveillance.
No way.
Yeah. So here I was giving my husband a hard time, and we just basically figured out that a lot of very difficult things we've learned at that, we started documenting and learned we had all been under surveillance. So that was fun.
Wow. That is interesting. Oh my gosh.
Commentary driving, calling it out loud.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I have two more questions for you. One of them is more for me than our listeners, because I travel a lot, and I've never done the solo traveling thing. I've always been curious about it, but usually I travel with my mom. Sometimes my brother comes, but what do you feel as a female who's been all over and you've been in super dangerous areas? How do you feel like in terms of, do you find that there's a difference between a solo female traveling and a male female traveling? And what is your take and things like that on that?
Such a huge difference, because I had a lot of travel. Most of my travel was with my husband. And then I went through a period of time for a particular job in the CIA where I traveled by myself. And what a vast difference that was. I was like, wow, the world interacts with you very differently when you've got a spouse or a boyfriend or a colleague with you versus when I'm on my own. Very different. And I had to be a little bit paranoid when I traveled by myself. That's when I allowed myself to be a little extra guarded and not as open with the world, and more protective of myself and what I did and where I went. I would not do things by myself that I would have done with my husband. When you have another person with you, there's a little bit more safety in numbers, and I would forego doing a lot of that stuff on my own. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah.
I know it does, because I don't know, it's part of me, like I think about it and I'm like, oh, I'll just like solo travel, and then the other part of me is like, are you out of your mind?
I know. I wish we lived in a world where that wasn't such a big deal, right?
Yeah, but it's just, it's just, again, like you said, it's just, you got to be on, right? You got to be on. And the thing is, sometimes I don't want to be on all the time.
Right. That's the whole point of traveling.
That's the whole point of traveling. It's just like, I don't want to always be on.
Yeah.
Our final question for the show is, what do you have for our listeners that we can do on daily to build that mental fitness, that resilience, that grit, so we can handle the challenges that life is going to throw at us?
So each day, ask yourself, like, what can I do to get off the X today? What little thing, what little project, what little decision, what little step can I take? Doesn't need to be profound, doesn't need to be amazing or a big dream. It's just, what little thing can you get unstuck today that you didn't do yesterday? And those little things over time really add up to making a real difference. So I say start small and just keep doing it.
I love that. Thank you so much, Michelle. You're fantastic. You were really great. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and raw and opening up. And you were so personable, and you just made my job so much easier. I really enjoyed having you. You were a real blessing. So thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Gina. That was so fun. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad. And I'm going to put all your notes in, all your information in the show notes. So anyone that wants to contact you, you do keynotes. I'll put your books down there. So that way, is there anything else that I'm missing that our audience know about you? And do you do trainings too?
I do, mostly keynotes, and my husband do have a boutique consulting firm helping companies that get into trouble doing business in the Middle East. So we do a lot of diplomacy with government leadership over there. Wow.
I love that. Wow. Yeah. That's very, very interesting. And you're a fascinating person. So thanks again for being on the show. And everyone that's listening, please like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Substack member. It's completely free. You get so much bonus stuff to help level up your life and improve yourself and your mental fitness. So check that out, and I will see you guys all next week. Thank you so much.